So how does research buildings? All right. So one thing I just wanted to say about researching buildings, two things I wanted to say about researching buildings. One is, I think all of our minds are probably numbed by how much information is being digitized these days and how much we are able to access from the comfort of our own homes. That being said, building research often does require in-person archival visits because it's things that have not either yet been scanned or may never be scanned. So I just want to preface. And then the other thing is that you just never know what you're going to find. Often you'll feel like you're coming up short, and then maybe you'll get a kernel that will lead you down a path. And I say that because I was researching a warehouse in Brooklyn, and I honestly was coming up with nothing, going through the buildings department file, and suddenly I came across a letter that had been written by the president of the company that owned the building with an illustration of the building as it functioned. And what I mean by that was it was a grocery wholesaler that had two railroad tracks running through the building. It had pneumatic tubes. It had a loading dock for trucks. So you could see the trains coming off the East River into this building, carrying the raw, unprocessed goods, then being unloaded onto freight elevators up to the processing room where, say, the apples are being made into applesauce or apple pies, where they would then go down a conveyor belt to another packaging room, and then down another set of elevators, and then out to the loading dock to the trucks, which would then take them to the markets. So you could see this activity through this illustration. Just a letter, you know? And so it really did sort of open my mind about sometimes I'm really daunted by what I'm finding or not finding, and suddenly there's something there. I think the AIA guide is a really good place to start if, for instance, you're not at a computer. Because this is a building by building inventory throughout the 5 boroughs. Now, not every building is included in this compendium, but if your building is included, you can immediately get original architect, original construction date, and often, if there's been a sizable renovation, you can also get that architect and that date as well. So typically the entry gives you the name of the building, followed by the address, gives you the construction date and the architect, and then you'll get a blurb about the building, or maybe it'll be an architectural critique, and then maybe a thumbnail photo. So this is just a detail. I use Webster Hall as a case study because it's just such an interesting building in terms of its history when I teach this give this lecture. So already we're getting from the AIA guide, construction date, architect, purpose built as a dance hall. Also, we know it's a New York City landmark. How do we know that? Because it has an apple. The apple is solid. It is an individual landmark. If it is hollow, it's part of the historic district. That's just in the AIA guide. That's their terminology. Also, books on New York City architecture. This series in particular, the New York books, are incredible resources, organized by typology. So there's a whole section on religious buildings, a whole section on apartment houses, a whole section on row houses. The dates, and there's 5 of them, 1880, 1900, 1930, 1960, and 2000. Typically span 10 years before the date and 10 years after. So the date's kind of like right in the middle of the range. And these are just wonderful books for giving you context. So even if your building is not included in the book, you can get enormous information about what was getting built in terms of that particular building type at that time. Other books deal specifically with a specific building type. This, as I said, is the definitive book on the New York City row house and townhouse. Started out as a thesis at Princeton, and this book has become the textbook. Other books on materiality, cast iron architecture by the master, Margot Dale, had a passion for these buildings. She is largely responsible for Soho, the district that we have today. She was she had these magnets she put on the buildings to campaign to get them designated. And then, of course, so many books on New York City history. This is just a little section on Webster Hall, which, by the way, is this building, not this one, which is the Catholic school. But look, if you know the building today, it does not have this roof. It's actually just this flat. So we're already getting key information just by this photo. And then it says that it was a popular place for elaborate masquerade balls in the teens and 20s, hosted by radical organizations. And radical, of course, is gay. So this is the New York City Department of Buildings. You enter in the borough and the address, and you will get what I like to call the homepage for the building, which will tell you also whether it's been designated or not as a landmark. It doesn't give you granular information like it's in a district or a landmark. It'll just tell you that it's designated by the City of New York. But it also gives you the block and lot number, which is key information. You have to have that often when you're going to other archives. It tells you the community district, and then it will tell you how many applications have been filed for the building, whether it's alterations, new building permits, demolition, electrical, plumbing, elevator, what have you. So this screenshot is before Webster Hall was designated, and it says calendared. Does anybody know what that might mean?
This is the last lecture.
Oh, good, okay. So calendared, yes, it's being considered by the Landmarks Commission, but not yet designated, not yet heard. And then here it says landmark, so this is after it's been designated. So New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, very happy to report they have now started scanning, digitizing, posting their designation reports online. For the longest time, this was not so. Actually, it was the organization that runs this particular building, the Neighborhood Preservation Center, that was able to get grants and do this. They also had a database as well of the designation permits. So you go to the homepage, click on designation reports, enter in Webster Hall, and you'll get this little entry here, which gives you the hyperlink to the designation report, hyperlink to a map, and then just some brief information about the architect, construction date, and when it was designated. Also, they call it Queen Anne, but I would differ. I would call this Renaissance Revival. Another type of designation report, completely separate from local designation, is listing on the state and national registers of historic places. So this is an independent designation process and recognition. To access these types of designation reports, you would go to the state website, click on Online Tools, CRIS, Cultural Resource Information System, brings you to this summary, and you click on CRIS again, agree to sell your firstborn, proceed as a guest, search. Once you hit search, you're actually home free. I have it laid out here where you have to do all these other steps, but when you hit search, you'll actually get this map, and you can zoom into the map. And if you know, of course, where your building is, click on the building. It will be shaded in a color if it's had some sort of survey or if it's listed on the National Register. If you click on it, you will then get essentially these, which are attachments that you can click on. It brings us to the National Register nomination. Now, Webster Hall is not listed, so, or it has not been, it actually had undetermined, which was interesting. So there was no survey there, but Metropolitan Museum of Art, yes, that's listed. This is just the cover page of the designation report and a typical photo that you'll see. So accessing New York City Department of Building files. Our buildings department goes back to 1865 here in Manhattan. Unfortunately, the records that you will find at the buildings department only go back typically to like the early 90s. So if your building is below 34th Street, there all are alternatives. And why 34th Street? Because there was a fire. in the 1980s, and my understanding was all the records for buildings above 34th Street burned. Terrible. Terrible for the profession, believe me. But just to say that there is an archive that I'm going to talk about where you can look at these original files for the buildings below 34th Street. There are also some online databases that have information for all the buildings.
And what are the dates for the building records in the other boroughs besides Manhattan? Are they the same or?
Actually, Brooklyn's Buildings Department, they do have original building applications that go back to the 19th century, the mid to late 19th century. I don't know the exact date when that was formed, but it would be early because Brooklyn's incorporated as a city in like 1833, so yeah. And then Queens and Staten Island, I've not had as good luck. It seems very similar to the one here where it's only the most recent building department files.
1930 is the date that we're told that there was a fire in the records department, same story.
In which borough?
Staten Island.
Staten Island, yes. Okay, that makes
And
sense.
actually, I've been told that there was a fire in the records department as well in Brooklyn. Is that-
Really?
Yeah, because the records for my house have somehow been destroyed too, and I heard that there was.
That's interesting.
So, I mean, I
There
could
seem to
be
be
wrong about
lots of
that, but,
fires.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so the date that appears in the records is the date of that fire?
I don't know. All I know is that I had somebody who knew looking into it for me, and these records were destroyed. There was.
Well, the census burned also. There's no census for the
My house
1880
is
census to
1900.
1900. They only
That's
have the
right.
police
Yeah, I think
records.
it's
They only have
1900.
the police census.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the houses in the historic district on the north shore of Staten Island are listed as having been built in 1930. And they were all built at the end of the 19th century.
Wow.
But they're all listed in the records as 1930 because,
Because that's all they do.
yeah.
Yeah, right. So Department of Buildings, it's on microfiche. And there are some original scanned documents through the New York City Department of Buildings website, which I'll show you. But the municipal archives for these properties below 34th Street, which is across from the municipal building on Chambers, this can be the mother lode, if in fact they have your building. So these are plans that show existing conditions. These drawings happen to be from the 1950s, which was kind of a find. So this is the building as it is today, so you would be able to get some information from this if in fact you were trying to restore the storefront. But I don't know if that's original, that's what it looked like in the 50s, but it's a 1913 building. So I looked for Webster Hall at the Municipal Archives and I found the original building permit, as well as subsequent alteration permits. So because we already know the architect and date, just confirmed it was built as a dance hall. NB 1212-1886, so new building. This was the 1212th permit to be filed in that year, in 1886. There's also an apartment in the building. We know the owner now, built with a peaked roof, which we saw, only 70 feet wide. Well, that's interesting, because we know that the building got an initial, I think it must be 95, or I don't even know how the math works with that, because the typical width is 25 by 100. But we know that it extends to 125 East 11th today. So at some point there was a side addition. And lo and behold, 1892, 7th permit filed for an alteration. Here's the 20-foot side addition. Also designed by the same architect. That's kind of interesting. You know, usually you have later alterations that are not designed by the same architect. Continues to be a dance hall, but now it has a restaurant, and the roof is identified as mansard. They're just calling it a different roof, even though it's the same peaked. Here's one from 1930, and they're talking about a fire. Building still being used as a dance hall, preparing the roof after the fire, replacing the floor, roof, and balcony beams damaged by a fire. So if one were doing work on the building as they are now, they would know, in the absence of any other conflicting information, that those were not original floors, roofs, or balcony beams. And they probably dated to 1930. So this is under actions on this homepage for your property, the New York City Department of Buildings website. Click on that, and they have the certificates of occupancy. Now, and they're hyperlinked, the PDFs. Now you can see they haven't entered dates in for when these C of Os were issued, but sometimes you can find very old certificates of occupancy that have been scanned and hyperlinked. And so they'll basically tell you what the use of the building was on each floor and the maximum occupancy.
You can also kind of do a cross-reference with the census records to see who actually lived in the building, like how many servants there were on,
Yes.
you know, things like that. It's kind of interesting.
Yes, that's a very good point. So then, if you look at jobs filings and you click on that, that's how you get to this more recent information, the early 1990s to the present. They give you quick summary lines, and then very important, there's the job number here. If you were to look down this list and say, oh, I need to know more about the replace the damaged wood beams at the basement, you would need to have this number when you go into the Department of Buildings. Although they have terminals there, you can, theoretically look it up there, but just so you know, you'll need the job number when you're calling up this application at the desk there. If you click on that hyperlink, you're going to get just the architect who filed, the expediter. It really doesn't offer very much more information than that summary line. The sentence is completed here, so, But this is this database, which to me has been night and day in terms of accessibility in being able to discern original construction dates, original architects. The Real Estate Record and Builder's Guide was a trade publication that essentially listed all of the new buildings as well as alterations. In this database is between 1868 and 1922. Now, admittedly, it's kind of funky. You can't just enter in the address and the entry will come up. I would advise that you enter in just the street name, and then when you see what comes up in terms of the hits, and you click on one, just to get a sense of how they list the addresses, because sometimes it'll be, let's say, 5th Avenue, first of all, it's 5th Ave, no period, comma, NS, which means north side, 100 feet or something like that from corner or something.
This is Columbia devised, right?
No, this is Columbia created the database of this old
Avery
trade.
created the database.
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
the library created
they
the
did, but
database.
I don't know how you could get around this
Right.
particular thing. Yeah, because it is kind of there is another database I'm going to show you.
Okay.
This next one. By the way, it's not conclusive because I did enter in Webster Hall, and what came up was I was not able to find the original building permit in this database for Webster Hall. So it's not completely comprehensive. But
I've been spending a lot of time scanning through the building records by decade, and there are also typos. Like I just found
there you go.
10 houses on Parkside Avenue in Brooklyn that are listed as being on Bedford Avenue. So it's like north side of Bedford Avenue, which runs north-south.
Oh no!
So they just reversed
Yes.
Bedford Avenue and Parkside Avenue, the words in the entry, but there's no other.
That's huge.
They have to be these houses, so it's not, it's totally imperfect.
Yes. Yeah. And on that note, I'll talk about the second database for this imperfect. So Christopher Gray, everybody heard of this man? So he was the architectural historian for the New York Times. He had this Sunday column called Streetscapes, which he would talk about old buildings or old neighborhoods. And he also was a professional building researcher. And as really a service to the public, he created a database for building permits in Manhattan filed between 1900 and 1986. I don't know if they're scanning more. Unfortunately, he passed away, but the website is still active. His wife is still alive, and his head research person is still alive. So they are still maintaining this website. I entered in the architect's name and was able to get a lot of hits. Well, why is that important? If you are trying to make a case for significance for a building, you want to know what else the architect designed, whether this was typical of the work or anomalous. So things like that are really helpful. Besides just looking for your building. Here's another one that's more recent. The AIA guide. AIA, the main office for the American Institute of Architects, is located in Washington, D.C. They created this database where they've scanned original applications from their members. And these go back to certainly the 1920s, where you've got PDF versions. So this is also great in terms of understanding who the architect was, where did they go to school, when were they born. Often, if they died and their membership was terminated, they'll have the terminated notice, which will explain either the person's retired or and then they will also list their projects, like some of their greatest hits and awards, and then where they went to school. So it's a wonderful database. If your architect's listed, essentially this is for the last name of the architect. Just click on it, and then you'll see the list of architects' names. So that brings us to historic maps, which are more useful, certainly, if you have not been able to discern an original construction date. And so historic maps are able at least to give you a window in which your building may have been originally constructed and or altered by doing a contrast and compare of various maps. New York Public Library, I can't sing the praises enough. First of all, fantastic map room if you ever get a chance to research out of there. Completely restored, incredible collection. But now, more recently, they have digitized to a fairly, I'm sure as we are here tonight, they are digitizing maps. There is so much available online for the city's five boroughs.
You do know that it has, I can't remember what it is, but somebody went around and photographed every building in New York as part of the WPA project.
Yeah, I'm going to get to photographs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those
Like one
maps,
step ahead of me here.
those maps, the New York Public Library, they have some, I guess a fair number of them are downloadable, and you can make them show up in Google Earth exactly where they should be.
That's impressive.
I forget the word, it's rastered or something.
Uh-huh.
So you can choose.
You can do an overlay.
Rastered or unrastered, and you can either look at it on their website or you can download it and open it in Google Earth. It's really helpful.
That's fantastic. Yes.
Oh, no.
You're just stretching your arm.
But anyway, I mean, Google is based in the basement of the library, New York Public Library. They have a whole setup down there.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Now that they have it in core catalogs.
Municipal Archives has a limited map collection in-house, so you have to go there. Library of Congress actually has a very good map collection online. New York Historical Society also has a wonderful map collection that goes way, way back. And other internet sources, I'm just going to mention one. His name is David Rumsey, R-U-M-S-E-Y. He's a private map collector, and he has an incredible website with respect to maps that you can zoom into. You can pull them up, zoom into. Really wonderful for research. So, New York Public, I entered in 11th Street. And this is just an example. Here's a map from 1890 showing Webster Hall before that side addition, and then 1960 with the side addition at 125. So again, this is contrast compare thing with various maps to get an understanding of the building footprint and how it's changed over time. There is a separate database that you can use only in the library, and it's the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps. So Sanborn was a national fire insurance company concerned with fire insurance and buildings that would burn. They created maps for certainly all the major cities, but towns and cities across America. They would periodically update their maps. So they start in, I want to say, late 1880s, early 1890s, and they go typically up to like 1955 is the latest I've seen. The Sanborns, it's interesting, this particular map doesn't give us a lot of information. If you, for instance, look at a factory complex on a Sanborn, sometimes it will tell you the material of each building, what the building is processing. There isn't as much granular information here. This is, of course, the Catholic school I was talking about, the post office we know on 4th and 11th. Here's our building. Block number 556, lot number 683B. Anybody have an idea what that might mean? For Webster Hall. So it's 3 stories over basement. So if you see, this is 6 stories with a store, 4 stories over basement, 3 stories over basement, so on. All right, so historic photographs. New York Public Library, fantastic. Municipal Archives, I think they might be up to having scanned 173,000 photos now that are available from the comfort of your own home, all historic. Municipal Archives has a limited database. Library of Congress also has wonderful photo collection. New York Historical Society, New York Historical is not so much online as it is in person, but they do have a wonderful collection there. And then the Museum of the City of New York. And I was mistaken, I'm sorry. Museum of the City of New York is the one that has this very, very large collection of digitized photographs, historic photographs. And then of course just Googling image. So here's some photos that I came across from New York Public. Sometimes the photos are dated, so you have to look at the cars or the people and what they're wearing. And I don't know, fans of Downton Abbey, I mean, you know, you have an idea of period dress, so sometimes that's all you have to go on. Other times, you know, you're only getting peripheral information here. This is not the forefront of the photo, but it's in the photo. Maybe you didn't know that the roof had disappeared by 1936. So just, you know, information you might be getting. The tax photos.
Right.
So between 1939 and 1941, there were photographers that went out and shot every single building in New York City. All 5 boroughs. They did this throughout the year, and sometimes, in fact, you'll see a blizzard in front of your building. Remarkable. And then there was always a guy with the sign to tell you that it is block 556, lot 68 in Manhattan. So this is Webster Hall in this particular period of time. These photos have become invaluable, especially if you're going before the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and they will always want to see, well, what were the original conditions? And what are you trying to do, and how is it consistent with or appropriate with what was original? Now, this is a snapshot in time. This is not when the building was built, but one probably gets the idea that these are the original windows or the original window configuration. You know, now it's just brick or CDU infill, so we're getting really good information here. And then we've got this kind of streamlined, modern, you know, canopy here, and this older canopy here. So this is really helpful, especially for architects and conservators. Oh, I should just say one other thing about these photos. So you can view these photos for free with their microfilm machines, but the quality, if you want to print them out, is not very good. You can also order them 8 by 10, I think they charge like 35 bucks, and the resolution is great, high res. Other municipal archives photos. This is giving us a pretty nice view. Here we've got this blade sign we hadn't seen before. More information about the canopy. And then today. There's a lot of work to be done in this building. Library of Congress. All right, well now we're getting really interesting information about this building. Garment workers gathering. So the Garment Workers Union was actually founded at Webster Hall, the Amalgamated Workers. And then you've also got these Greek nationals that are rallying at Webster Hall. So we're learning something else about Webster Hall besides the radical, the radical parties that they were having. Here, so evocative, you know, so louche poster for one of those masquerade balls. And then 1950s, 1960s, it's operating as a recording studio for Broadway cast recordings. So How to Succeed in Business, How Now Dow Jones, it becomes this other use, which is actually rather significant when you're talking about a history of a building. But also, we're getting information about what the interior looked like at that particular point in time, where the proscenium and maybe this coffered ceiling may have been original, maybe the soffit's here, but this certainly looks like a later treatment, especially based on a subsequent photo. Library of Congress also has a database which is called HABS, Historic American Building Survey. This was a back-to-work program under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where they had architects, photographers, and historians go out and document buildings. They didn't document every building, but they did do not just high style, they also did like simple storefronts. So this is a wonderful resource if in fact if your building isn't included, if you were doing work on a building, a like building, you might be able to get some information. These are measured drawings. This is Colonnade Row, which I showed you earlier, which if you've seen this today on Lafayette is a very sad remnant of its former self.
I worked in that building
You
for
did?
8 years, yeah.
Wow.
The Tuckahoe marble was falling off, so they had to put these nets around
Oh, it's so sad,
columns
yeah.
to keep it from hitting people.
I wondered what those were for. I
Yeah.
didn't know if birds were nesting somewhere or what the deal was.
No,
with
it
those
was
nets.
because it's crumbling and they don't have the resources to restore it properly.
Well, if they ever get around to it, there's
Yeah.
the information here. Measured. Then the designation report just has photos too, often. Here's another one. But they're not giving us any sort of indication about what's going on there, just the year. And then these photos from the Museum of the City of New York. So here's one of the masquerade balls, and look at the detail we're getting here, the balconies that we haven't seen before. So you just never know. More about the posters, just so evocative and bacchanalian. So that finally brings us to historic newspapers and journals. New York State historic newspapers, there is a website where you can access these, nyshistoricnewspapers.org. New York Times, as we all know, even as a non-subscriber, you can access some articles from the Times online. In the New York Public Library, you can access everything. And then if you're a subscriber, of course, you can access everything. Fulton history, I'll talk about. So, New York Times, you go to the articles and database, enter in New York Times, then it brings it up here, 1851 to 2009. Click on, I entered Webster Hall in, of course, quotes, 1,665 hits. And I think, actually, I entered it in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle database, too. There was something like 900 hits. I mean, who knew Brooklyn would be so interested in Webster Hall and Manhattan? So here, just give you an idea of, of course, the information you can get sometimes. It's giving us a little mini history of the building. Talking about the fire that happened 18 years ago. Refers to an alteration 2 years earlier. And then talking about persons that were prominent in the political life of the city and nation have addressed their assemblages here. Contains 4 ballrooms, foodstuffs for several hundred meals as part of the current program of the operating corporation. So, scene of dances, conventions, and political rallies. I can't begin to understand where sort of the graphic design comes from with this particular privately owned site, but just to say that this gentleman has done us an enormous service. He also must be scanning as we speak. This is 23 million New York State newspapers. This man has scanned. And I think it's up to 27 million now. So just remember, always enter in quotes if you're going to enter in something in one of these databases. Otherwise, you will get every hit with Webster, people's names, or in every hit with Hall. So you wanted Webster Hall, the name of the building. I entered it in, and I think there's over 500, although I'm not sure that there's probably a Webster Hall somewhere else. Clicked on this particular one, and it's a rehearsal call for the chorus for a show that they're doing at Webster Hall. It's just kind of fun. I mean, you know, it's before the telephone. I mean, this was the only way to get the word out, essentially. So finally, who owned, lived, or operated a business in a building? For this, we look at current tax records, historic property records, the deeds, US Census data, and local directories. I had to ask my students the other day, do you know what a phone book is? And they rolled their eyes, because I guess people still do know what phone books are. All right, so Department of Finance website, you go to the home page, and property history value, click on that. Enter in the borough, the block, and the lot. Statement of the account. This is part of the owner's name. You're not getting everything, so I'm just trying to get you to the current owner here, and there's the current owner. They also have limited deed information on this site as well, through those links. So when you go in person to the property deed, real property records office, which is on John Street for Manhattan, you have to have the block and lot number before you go. And once you get there, you can either search their microfilm or the docket books, which are on open shelves, to find the deeds related to your property. And they're all organized by the block number. The docket books are really interesting because they also offer this abbreviated history of the site of the block before it went into private ownership. So they'll talk about the New York City Common Council and deeding the land, and it's really kind of interesting, just this little prehistory about the lot. And then, of course, they've got the deeds, grantor seller, grantee buyer. Here's an example of a deed. You may be familiar with this term meets and bounds, which is essentially when they have a description of where the property is located. This is, 5 stones from the oak tree going left at the barn down the way. It's really very primitive and often very hard to discern that it's your property unless it's tied by the block and lot number. In terms of US Census data, local directories, certainly there's microfilm and New York Public, but I say why bother, because they have subscriptions to Ancestry.com so that you can go into the public library, you can bring your laptop, and you can then get into the New York Public Library database on the site and look at Ancestry. And you can do searches by address, your ancestors' names, and often get the census data for that, as well as local directory information. So census data, we're getting the head of the household, we're getting other members of the household, we're getting servants information, we're getting the dates, the ages of all the occupants, we're getting the country of origin, and then we're getting the occupations. It's a fantastic resource. And then finally, local directories. You would get the name, the address at the time, 1786 in this case, and then the occupation, the person that's listed. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Just leave that slide up so I can.
Oh yeah, sure, feel free.